Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University. So today I'm with Dr. Russell Seymour and Elliot Brown, and we're going to be talking about climate change and the impact that it's having on sport. We'll discuss the UK sports environmental sustainability strategy and practical steps that NGBs, sports clubs and individuals can take to influence positive change. So, hi Russ, hi Elliot, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi mine.
Before we get going, we often like people to introduce themselves. So could you guys give us a brief introduction to your experiences? And we start with yourself, Russ.
Yeah, hi Martin, happy to. So I'm Russell Seymour. I'm a senior fellow in sport and sustainability in the Institute for Sport Business on the London campus. In terms of background, what I did before that, my whole background was in ecology and environmental sciences, and that was going to be my route. But I ended up working in professional sport in a completely different role, but then started looking at the environmental impact of putting on a major sports event. I was at Lord's Cricket Ground, and so I took a report to the chief executive one day, who read it and thought it was important enough to offer me a full-time job. So I became the first full-time sustainability manager at any sports venue in the world, apparently. It was a first, so I started to develop some of the background behind sustainability in sport, and that's what brought me into Loughborough in London back in 2016, and I'm now been taken onto the staff to teach on the new sustainability and sport master's course.
Excellent. I think we'll probably touch upon some examples from your time at Lord's and some other events later on. Thank you, Russ. Elliot, can you let our listeners know anything about you?
Yeah, tough act to follow. My name's Elliot Brown. I'm the Sustainability Projects Manager at Loughborough University. So I'm based in the actual university sustainability team. One of my projects, which we're looking at the moment, is around sustainability in sport for Loughborough and its campuses, and how we can kind of drive that agenda forward. I mean, I'm really passionate about kind of two things, are my top two passions. One is climate change, sustainability, and the other is sport. So it's a really great challenge to be involved with and to look at doing this. I'm a keen sportsman myself as well, and a Loughborough grad. So I've kind of been able to witness the best that sport can offer, but also I've been able to see firsthand the impact of climate change on sport. So it really kind of helped my personal understanding, and recently I've just completed a master's in my climate change policy and politics course at Loughborough, with my research project actually focusing on climate policy and sport. So that's actually helped me again with my knowledge to really build a base so that we can kind of really push this agenda at Loughborough.
That's going to be very helpful in this podcast, because we're going to go through just some examples to start with, then we're going to look at policy, and then we're going to look at impacts and action. So you're perfectly placed, Elliot, to help us in this conversation. So thank you. So let's get into it. Let's start a little bit with climate change and the impact it's having on sport. So have you guys, Rose, have you got some examples of, I think we've all seen some examples, to be honest, but can you provide us with some examples of where climate is actually impacting on sport already?
Yeah, look, I think there are a whole range of different impacts. Just in general, typically climate change, wherever you are in the world, and this is a very big generalization I'm going to make, but just as a rule of thumb, wherever you are in the world, whatever weather you've been experiencing for the last few decades, you'll have the same, because you're in the same geographical position, the seasons don't change, but it's going to be more extreme. It's going to be more impactful. So wherever there have been storms before, they're going to be bigger, they're going to be more ferocious. Extreme heat in the summer is going to increase. Extreme rainfall, big dumps of rainfall, because warmer air will allow more water to evaporate from the oceans, will go up into the clouds, will be dumped onto the land. So we're just going to start getting much more extreme impacts. So even just recently, we've had a few named storms come across the UK in the last few weeks. We've had football clubs that have been flooded out. We've had events that have been knocked out because of extreme rain. Last year we had 40-degree temperatures in the UK for the first time. We're playing professional cricket on those days, and players were being impacted, having to go off the pitch. Spectators were being impacted because of the heat. People are actually getting heat stroke, which can be a medically urgent condition to treat. So it's not just the players, the participants. It can also be, it can be coaches, it can be officials, but equally it can be the spectators that are there to watch.
I think there's some great examples there. One of the reports that I looked at from yourself, the Game Changer report, said that the North Sea has crept 70 metres towards Montrose Golf Club within the last 30 years. I thought that really stood out when I was reading these.
And Montrose is one of the oldest golf clubs in the world. I mean, it's centuries old, and it's being impacted just in recent years, gradually losing a few metres each year, and they're redirecting the course. So interesting you mentioned the Game Changer, because at the point of recording, the new Game Changer 2 report is about to be released, and it updates sort of 5 years on all of those impacts that were being talked about 5 years ago. And without giving away too much, frankly, they've all got slightly worse in those intervening 5 years.
Well, it'd be really interesting to see that. So hopefully we might put that in the press release, actually, so people can access that potentially when it does come out. And I presume, is that through the BASIS website?
Yes, that'll be on our resources on the BASIS website, basis.org.uk.
Anyone who wants to find out more about that, we'll certainly put a link to that website as well. So Elliot, what kind of impacts has it been having at Loughborough?
Climate change, really, we are really starting to see the impacts here. I think it's long gone the thought that climate change is something that's in the distant. It's actually something that's here and present now, and I think we're already having to adapt our operations to how we manage that. And there's a couple of things that kind of really have occurred in the last few years, one of which being a major development of a building. During that process, they actually changed the flood risk based on new climate science, and that flood risk basically massively increased the risk of where we're about to put our new tennis centre extension, which was a partnership with the Lawn Tennis Association as well. And as a result of that, we've actually then had to build that building on stilts. So we have a real life example on campus where a building would not have been able to be put in unless we'd have put a process in place that could actually mean that building is more resilient to climate change and the increased flood risk, and the likelihood that we're going to see that moving on. And I think flood risk is probably the biggest risk we see on campus, and we're actually quite lucky we can tap into some of our amazing researchers. We've got a company called Physico that's kind of a spin-out company from Loughborough which focuses on flood risk, and they've done some work on our campus specifically. And when you actually look, they've coded all our assets and buildings that are kind of at risk of flood. And the amount of sports facilities that are on there is quite startling. The tennis, the athletic centres, some of our really big sports facilities are sitting in these flood risk zones. So, as Russ says, the more extreme weather we get, those kind of big rain dumps that we expect to see, they are really going to have an impact on our ability to be able to host sporting events, but also just do our general day-to-day sports operations as well. And I think that 40-degree temperature that we had last year, we had sports facilities, we had major events going on campus. I think some of the work that I did as part of my masters, we weren't expecting to hit 40 degrees for. I just produced a report on climate risk for Loughborough for the university specifically, and all the models I'd done didn't predict a 40-degree temperature even in the worst case scenarios before kind of 2040, 2045. And then all of a sudden, 6 months after handing in that report, we've got a 40-degree temperature. So it's really, really challenging. And we're now starting to have to look at heat policies, different policies that we've got to put in place to make sure that we can continue sport, but also we can do it in a safe manner as well. So there's a lot that we're doing in this space at Loughborough that we've had to really think now differently. And we send athletes across the whole of the UK and some internationally as well. So how do we get them there? What's the process for that? How do we make sure they're safe in these locations that they're going to where they might be more vulnerable to climate risk as well? So a lot of conversations internally within that as well.
It's interesting to hear the kind of the risk management strategies that are around it. And I'm assuming that there's obviously increased cost from building things on stilts that's going to impact things further, because obviously sustainability, we're looking at environmental sustainability today, but there's the kind of social and economic side that we're probably not going to touch on and support today, which all feed into each other. You mentioned, I think when I spoke to you previously, and do correct me if I'm wrong, so you just mentioned the 40 degrees. Am I right in saying that last year's graduations, we had the hottest temperature and the coldest temperature last year?
Yeah, that's right. So in July we literally had 40 degrees. So you can imagine all the students in their gowns and things like that. Very close to cancelling that event. They managed to put processes in place to keep it going, but it was crazy. They basically said you don't have to dress up smart. You can wear shorts and t-shirt underneath your gown. Never seen anything like it. And literally six months later, in our winter graduation, it was -5. So you've kind of gone from one extreme to the other within a 6 month. Obviously, in the seasonal, but that again, all of a sudden puts a massive risk on events that we host on campus, and they're obviously non-sporting events, but there's no reason why that couldn't have fallen on a weekend where we had sport, or a day that we had a sports fixtures. So
how's all that, both the temperature and the flooding, really is the main two things that are coming across here? How's that affecting fixtures and things at Loughborough? Because I know I coach an under-8s football team, and already this season I think we've already had 2 games cancelled already, maybe 3. And I might be wrong, but when I was a kid, I think maybe January, February got some called off for frozen pitches, but we've already had 2, and I dread to think how many games they're going to miss this season because of flooding.
yeah, so that's kind of a project that we're doing. One of it is, well, okay, what climate indicators do we have on campus? So how can we use campus to understand better the impact that climate's going to have? And one of those indicators we're looking at is sports fixtures, so cancellation of sports fixtures, and we're starting to build up a database of that, basically to look at what are the weather events, when is it happening, how often it's happening. We're probably in a slightly unique position at Loughborough in the fact that we're probably better off than a lot of sports organisations in terms of the standard of our facilities, particularly grassroots. They are elite level facilities, so we've probably got better drainage. We've got a self-dedicated staff that work full time on this. So we probably have less cancellations than maybe others would see, but certainly we've seen a steady increase. We've already seen more in the first 2 months this year than we did last year in terms of cancellations. So that's something that we also want to work with Bucks with, so the British University Championships. We're actually starting some dialogue with them about okay, can we do a wider database of sports fixtures and cancellations across university sport, because it's huge. I mean, last week I think someone told me that we had 92 fixtures on campus last Wednesday afternoon. It's bonkers, and so the impact that it potentially has on that is huge. So that's something that we'll be working on as time goes by. But yeah, we're keen to kind of better understand that area.
Because I was having pretty good facilities. As I sit here near the rugby pitch, I can see that's pretty nice. We've got the stadium, we've got loads of really good facilities, but yeah, it's also affecting professional clubs as well, isn't it? In terms of, and is it more important regarding, you mentioned Provisco, is that how we say it? Yeah. Mapping out floodplains and things like that. I assume they're probably even bigger factors if you are in a floodplain or near a floodplain. They're going to be rising and causing more issues. Are there any clubs out there, professional clubs that we know of, that are actually potentially in danger zones here? I know I'm a Nottingham Forest fan. I'm going right next to the River Trent. I'm just wondering now, is that going to be a problem?
Yeah, I think it is. There was a report just a couple of years ago by the Rapid Transition Alliance, who were looking at, they're all about getting to a low carbon economy as quickly as you can. That's a rapid transition in their title. They did a report on sport, and they reckon that a quarter of all professional football clubs in England will be facing some kind of flooding at least annually by 2050. And some of those are Premier League football clubs. You're talking about the likes of Chelsea. I was going to say Southampton, but obviously they dropped last year. But there's a good number of high-profile football clubs that are going to be impacted by this. We need work to see where cricket, rugby, other pitch sports actually sit. But there are some good databases out there that show you what the flood risks are moving forward, and there are a lot of sports venues that do sit on floodplains. I mean, even looking at sort of local authority pitches and that sort of thing, they cite that you need flat ground. Obviously, that's where we need to run around and play our sports, and land that probably isn't going to be developed for housing and other sort of high value. So they put them on floodplains. It makes sense because in a way, I hate to say this on this particular podcast, but in a way, sport is slightly expendable. We know it's not, but from an economic perspective, from a long-term economic perspective, it's an easier thing to do, put sports venues onto floodplains as compared to housing or other development. So we're almost a sacrificial lamb, if you like, to what's happening around the way that we've managed sport in the past, and these changes that we're seeing in climate.
I'll just add to that as well. I've seen some really I play rugby and I've played for the last 17 years. I've been lucky enough to travel across England doing that, and I've seen some really mad stuff when it comes to flooding. And so a couple of examples: Derby Rugby Club, which isn't so far from here, they just spent, well, in conjunction with the RFU, hundreds of thousands of pounds putting in an artificial pitch, and they had really severe flooding. They're on a floodplain, and it literally lifted the pitch like a carpet and folded it down to one end of the pitch. And not only that, it's rubber based, so all that rubber crumb that's in that pitch has then gone downstream. It's entered the ecosystem. It's come through. So yeah, it's really, really challenging. And another rugby club, Bridgenorth Rugby Club, sits right on a floodplain. Again, they've just built a new clubhouse, building it on stilts. It's like there is a real impact across the board, different sports. And like Russ says, most of the places I go where I visited sports is usually quite close to a river or something that's that could potentially cause issues.
It's interesting with, we can see how sport is being impacted by all these things. And it's probably quite fitting, really, that we're now going to try and look at what strategies are in place and how can we, those of us who love sport, how can we bring action? How can we bring change? And I know that UK Sport have released their environmental sustainability strategy. And I was just going to run through a couple of things on that just before we kind of talk about it. So it says on here, climate change is impacting all of us, our athletes, health, competition and training spaces. And some examples: 2019 Rugby World Cup, they had the Pacific typhoons. The Australian Tennis Open was disrupted by bushfires. Long distance running events in Tokyo were moved north of the capital because the summer weather made the races impossible. You mentioned this already. 1 in 4 football league teams in England can expect partial or total annual flooding by 2050. And then of the 19 previous winter sports host locations, only 10 will be reliable in 2015 and just 6 by 2080. So the snow melting. And then the point that they make here, with no action, our team of tomorrow is under the threat, but together we can protect our future legacy. And I think that is a message to us all as sports fans, actually. Yeah, there's many, many other things that kind of impact upon climate. But if we can make any change, we should probably try and do something about this. I think that's probably a good message for us to try and get through. So in terms of the environmental sustainability strategy from UK Sport, what they've said is our aim is to leverage the enormous reach and momentum of elite sport to drive meaningful climate action change. And that's a great point. Sport touches so many people. And if we can make all those people to make actionable change, we might be able to make a difference. And then the long-term goal, British Olympic and Paralympic sport and major events to have a net positive impact on the environment by 2040. I mean, I don't know anything in this space. I'm kind of listening to you guys, and you've sent me some things across in this level. That seems like a very ambitious target. Is that something that we think that can be achieved?
Yes, and I would say it has to be.
Like you said that, Ross.
I think, yeah, look, the key thing, I mean, Elliot made a really good point earlier that we've often thought of climate change as something that's happening in the future. And you can think that if you look at some of these policies that do look at 2040, 2050 as their targets, because, let's be perfectly honest, everybody's busy. If you've got deadlines, you tend to put the further ones away. But this isn't a deadline. This isn't a deadline. This is a point in time where the best scientists who have been working on this, and we're talking about thousands of scientists coming together and talking about climate change. It's a point in time where they're saying, if we haven't sorted it by then, we have got really, really serious problems. We're talking about things now around sport, but you can look at other countries in the world where we're talking about life and death situations. About half of Pakistan was flooded. We're talking about a flooded football pitch. Half of the entire country was flooded earlier this year because of massive rains. These are life and death situations potentially. Trying to put sport into that context maybe feels a little bit trivial at times, but sport is important to so many people. So if we can put it into a sporting context, if we can just put these messages over, in an intelligent way, in a sensitive way, but actually saying this has got to be important to you because the thing that you love, the thing that you're passionate about, is going to be changed by this. And sport changes all the time. The way we play any sport now is going to be different to how it was played 20 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever. But that's usually coming from internally, because you get techniques, you get new coaching ideas, whatever, these innovations happen. This is something that's going to be imposed upon sport by our changing conditions, and we will have to adapt. Having just gone off on one like that, if we can put it into a sporting context and just encourage people to actually understand this, we quite often separate our sport from the rest of our life because it's the thing that we go to for pleasure, for enjoyment, for some kind of relief from other pressures. So you don't want to be throwing this information at people when they're wanting to watch, wanting to play, but just trying to make these connections in people's minds that actually climate change is happening in the real world, but sport is played in the real world as well. So it's trying to link these things together. And I think the UK sport approach is actually quite a responsible approach, but that 2040 target for being net positive, I think we have to do it. We can't actually speculate, is it achievable or not? We have to make it achievable.
It would have been a bad podcast if you'd have said no there, Ross. I was going out on a limb. So thanks. Thanks for saying
it was
yes.
A fairly safe bet, Martin.
Good. I do think, as you mentioned there, obviously there's, in the real world, there's much bigger issues than sport. But as UK Sport pointed out, I think using the power of sport to change behaviours is part of what they're talking about. So it isn't just when I go to sport, I will try to share a car as an example. Because I know travel is one of the big things, but it's also changing behaviours outside of sport and using sport to inspire people to do that. So I think sport can potentially have a bigger impact on the climate change than just changing things when we do sport.
Sorry, just jump in. I think that more than almost anything else that people do, we identify with sport. It's actually it's part of our identity. It's part of our lives, really, really deeply. Whether you're passionate about the sport you play, or whether you're a fan of a particular club, so we can influence in a really quite powerful way. Usually with very positive emotions. People have positive links to their sport, to their team. So we can, I'm trying to think of a better word than this. I was going to say use the word manipulate. It's often got a negative connotation. I don't mean it at all, but we can use that link. We can use those positive connections, positive emotions to actually say, something you love is going to be impacted. So is there something that you can do, and then multiply that up by taking it home with you and doing this in your job, in your personal life at home. These small actions can build up. There are big actions that also need to be taken, but individuals can start to take small actions that will build up and will all come together.
I think it's creating that ripple effect, isn't it, Russ? It's like it's how you can create that effect, and I think that's where I think coming back to Loughborough a little bit is like how we have nearly 5,000-6,000 student athletes competing in sport every single week across over 60 different sports. Like, imagine the power if we can better educate them in climate. And I was talking to Martin briefly about it just before we came on the podcast. The ripple effect of those 5,000-6,000 students that will then go and compete in different clubs across the UK and across the world as well. Like, that little knock-on ripple effect that they could potentially have is huge. If they can impact one or two people each, and then that takes it on. It's such a huge, powerful thing, like say, that sport drives that passion, and that's where I'm really keen to kind of work within Loughborough, particularly to kind of go, right, how do we get through to these people, find our allies within the different sports, and then go from there and build that out, because we can make huge change by this.
And Elliot, if I can just add to that, I think extend this decades into the future. These people that are doing their degrees now in sports management or playing sport, they're the future leaders of sport. These are the people, our listeners to this podcast, are going to go out and be leaders in sport management, in whichever sports they're choosing. So in 5, 10, 20 years time, if they've got this message, then things should be changing. Therefore, that 2040 target is definitely doable.
Absolutely.
100%. And I think, and Elliot has done a lecture for me actually, with the students, and it was interesting in that lecture because there was almost a small bit, and Elliot, correct me if I'm wrong, but there was almost a small bit where the students were getting to a point where they're like, come on, what are we doing about this? And Elliot, we'll touch upon some of the stuff Loughborough are doing at the moment. But I think just for an understanding and just to dig in a bit deeper, UK Sport have put out this sustainability strategy, and some of the things they're trying to achieve, we're going to touch upon now. So they have aligned it to the UN Sustainability Developmental Goals. So they've looked at responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land, and partnerships for the goals. And what they have then said to further move this forward, for those who aren't necessarily knowledgeable about UK sport, they're trying to then speak to the NGBs. So they've set a target for 2025, all NGBs to understand their environmental impact and have a sustainability action plan. And then by 2030, UK sport themselves to be net zero, and NGBs to have a 50% reduction in emissions. And then by 2040, as we mentioned, a positive impact. I do wonder, is that happening at club level? Are the NGBs filtering things down to professional and grassroots clubs yet? Or is that what's coming next? Or is that what
starting? Yeah, look, it does need to happen. These targets are being put in place. The UK government's new sports strategy does have a whole section in there on environmental sustainability. So it's starting. I'll be honest, it's been a bit of a slow burn for the last few years. As I said, I was one of the first sustainability manager at a UK sports venue. People just didn't know what I was doing. What's sustainability? We don't really know what's going on there. So it's a bit of a graft at the beginning. And I probably should have said in my introduction that because of that, I got in touch with other managers, other operational managers at venues, and I created something called BASIS, which we have mentioned. So a few people might have thought, well, what was BASIS? But BASIS is the British Association for Sustainable Sport. So we actually tried to give information to governing bodies, to clubs, about sustainability issues and what they can be doing. So BASIS has been around for about 12 years now, but it's the last few years we've really seen this uptick in interest. So yeah, it now sits in the Code for Sports Governance that is produced by UK Sport and Sport England, and all governing bodies that are getting funded need to adhere to that. So one of the requirements in the recent revision was boards need to take into account their environmental impacts. So there's now a requirement on the board to actually understand what their impacts are. So that's where these requirements in the UK Sport strategy come from, is they are actually enshrined in those requirements for the governing bodies. So yes, absolutely, it's going to start percolating down, but it will take a bit of time. And let's remember, a lot of, there's some very small governing bodies out there that are run by a small number of people. Take that down into participation sport, local clubs. Huge amount of voluntary support go into these sports and sports organisations. So again, we've got to do this in a sensitive way and in an intelligent way. It's important, I would argue, look, completely different impacts, but it's the same as equality, diversity and inclusion. Socially important, absolutely important. We've had to feed that down into these clubs. We've got to do the same things with environmental impacts.
Really interesting you mentioned EDI, because I'm part of a research team at the moment looking into some of that, and our starting point was looking at policies and whether people have these policies in place, and some do, some don't. I imagine, just from being around this a little bit, where are the NGBs with having policies and strategies in place? Are the majority of them not there yet, or what do you know about that?
I think a minority do have them in place already. I think there's a big chunk of organisations in the middle that are in the process of thinking about it, and they're going to be on at different levels in terms of exactly where they are. Very few will not be thinking around this, because it has become quite high profile in the last 6 months to a year. They know that this is coming, But I do think there's a big cohort in there that are thinking, we know it's important, but we're not too sure what's happening, which is why UK Sport and Sport England have been surveying governing bodies and are now providing support as well. So the target that you mentioned about everybody, all the governing bodies having a knowledge of their environmental impact by 2050 and having a policy in place, that is being supported by UK Sport.
I think I'll touch upon later on that the research that we are doing and hoping to do here at Loughborough and how we might be able to help and support with some of those NGBs. So we might touch upon that a little bit later on. But can we touch upon some of the things that we've done at the moment, Elliot? So I know you've started to put together an action plan and started to make some changes here at Loughborough already. So where are we with that? Like, what have we done so far?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the early stages within that. So we have developed an action plan, which kind of breaks it down into kind of 4 key areas around climate change, biodiversity as well. So for those that don't know, Loughborough, we're kind of a over 500 acre single site. We've got lots of green space. We've got lots of sports facilities that border ancient woodlands and all sorts. So we're a lot of what we're doing at the moment is looking at our policies and our development, because we do want to develop sport. We want to continue to offer world-class facilities, but how can we do that in a sensitive nature? And also, how can we do that linking in with some of the research and amazing research that we do at the university? So we've formed our own sustainability working group. So we're now looking at all our operations. So we've now started to look at, right, what energy data do we have? What impact are our buildings having? What's the impact of the swimming pool in terms of gas and CO2? And actually, okay, how are we going to start to decarbonize that? So it fits. I think we're probably in quite a unique position, because we've got to think about it in terms of, yes, we've got our Loughborough Sport arm, but we're also a wider kind of higher education institute as well. So we've got to kind of tread the line and make sure that all works together. But I mean, we're about 2,000 tons of CO2 just for electricity for our sports buildings. Now that's about a ninth of the overall university scope 1 and 2 emissions. So it's quite a high percentage. Then when you throw in the gas to heat the water of the pool, you throw in the travel for all our sports stars that are going around, all of a sudden we're pushing up 10-15,000 tons of CO2 probably. All our kit procurement, everything around that we do, and we provide kit for, like I say, nearly 6,000 student athletes. Significant kit partnership that we have, and that's one thing we're looking at is when we're going out to procurement. I know this is part of the UK sports strategy as well, as there's a section in there around procurement. Who are our partners? Who are we aligning ourselves with at the moment? So we're doing a lot of reviewing of our current partnership list, and we're going through and we're going, right, who are they? What are they? It was only a couple of years ago that we had a partnership with a water bottle company that was providing single-use plastic water bottles. Now that might be quite a small thing, but actually for us to try and go out and talk to people and kind of try and promote that we're trying to be sustainable, and then on the flip side we're giving out loads of free water bottles at an event the next day, and little things like that. So we're kind of probably starting quite small in terms of what small quick wins can we do, and there's some of the little things we do. So we've not renewed that contract because we didn't feel it was the right thing to do. But they're the conversations that we're starting to have. We've got gym equipment partnerships. What are they doing? How can we work better with them? And so recently had a conversation last week with some other academics in the same school as yourself, Martin, about, okay, how can we start to facilitate some conversations with the NGBs about the research we're doing and how we can offer certain solutions and how they could potentially approach us and kind of go, well, actually, could you help in this space? We've got a really, really positive, proactive partnership with SIS Pitches at the moment. We've currently got a test pitch on site, which has replaced the rubber infill with an organic kind of wood sawdust that's basically come from waste material. So they're testing that at the moment on our site. We're doing research in our engineering school around the water-based hockey pitches. So Russ mentioned that we're likely to get drier summers and things like that. Actually, are we going to have water to do water-based hockey pitches? And what are the solutions around that and stuff like that as well? So that's part of my role at the moment, is to kind of try and bring together all the different aspects of everything we're doing. And like I say, I mentioned to Martin, we're also then looking at our education and training. So that's a big piece that we're looking at the moment, is what's the best thing that we could offer. And I was on a webinar listening to us talk about the carbon literacy project and the sports toolkit. Is that feasible to offer to 5,000, 6,000 student athletes? I don't know, potentially not, but actually that might be really good for our sports teams and our operational staff. And then we might need to develop some bespoke training more aimed at student athletes, but they're kind of the paths that we're taking to kind of look at that. And we'd love to be in a place to launch something kind of next year, early next year, in terms of some training packages for different pockets of our kind of sports areas as well. So it's kind of probably a lot of small little things going on at the moment that we're just trying to kind of pull together. We're doing a lot of air quality monitoring as well on campus to make sure that the athletes that do perform are protected from that as well, in terms of other developments that are going on in the Loughborough and local area as well.
It sounds like you have got a lot that you're working on, Elliot. There's so many things I could pick up on there. One of them that kind of shined out to me there, because I'm still on the UK sports sustainability strategy. And there's a quote here that says leisure centres can contribute up to 40% of a council's direct carbon emissions due to heating and lighting large open spaces and water, as well as heating the water from swimming pools and shower facilities. And obviously we have an Olympic-sized swimming pool that you mentioned there. Are you looking at, so the next piece said we need a bigger focus on renewable energy. So is that one of the things that we're going to try and look at, renewable energy for things like swimming pools?
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know how much I'm allowed to say at this stage, but we have actually bid for some funding for a couple of different projects that kind of are looking at decarbonising the pool specifically. But that also sits within our wider decarbonisation plan for our estate overall. And I think that's the other bit in terms of I think the pool's either our 5th or 6th most gas hungry building. And when you consider the size of it compared to some of our other really, really large buildings, that's quite startling. And there's been conversations about, do you turn down the pool by a degree? But actually, what impact that might be fine for local community swimmers and whatnot, but actually what's the impact on the international elite swimmers that we have training there? What impact does that have on their ability to be able to train properly? So they're all the kind of fine lines we've got to balance within this. And I think the other bit around kind of decarbonisation, renewable energy, is that we're actually home to quite a lot of national governing bodies. I think we're either their head office or they've got a satellite office with us, and we've got over 15 NGBs on campus. They are actually pressurising us as well to kind of go, well, what are you guys doing? This is our office here, so this is counting towards our carbon emissions. How are you going to help us decarbonise and reduce our emissions for their offices and their facilities and stuff that they're actually operating at as well? And I had a really interesting walk around with Denise from Sport England, who's a sustainability manager there. She was like, what are you doing? How are you going to make our office carbon neutral, reduce the carbon, etc., net zero? And so we're now being, as well as us wanting to work with the NGBs, they're now starting to pressurise us as well at Loughborough. So, and I think that's a really important thing. Like, we've created a really unique ecosystem, and I had a really interesting chat. So just going off topic a little bit, but I had a really interesting chat with an athlete at the Sport Positive Summit last year at Wembley, and I asked the question. I said, "Are you at a point where you're now starting to consider where you go to do training camps and things like that?" And she said, "Yeah, I want to know that where I'm going it's a sustainable solution." She's obviously clearly was really passionate about it because she was at that conference anyway. But commercially for the university, there's a big piece of work in this as well, because actually if we're not showing NGBs that we're working in this, there's a chance that we could lose them from our campus. We lose that unique ecosystem. So there's kind of two arms to it really as well, from a commercial perspective in terms of, can we offer training camps? We were lucky enough to have Forest Green Rovers do their pre-season camp last year, but I guarantee that Dale won't let his team come here if we're not showing to be sustainable as a university and a campus and the facilities that we offer. So we've got a lot of work to do in this space.
So, because again, I'm still on the UK Sports Sustainability, Environmental Sustainability Strategy, and their first thing is reshape operations and procurement. So obviously, you know, they're procuring a service from us and therefore need to make sure that we are doing it. And if you're now saying as well, athletes are looking at this, teams, obviously Forest Green Rovers being a great example, and Hannah Dingley is an alumni who I think she's academy manager still, but she'd stepped in as the first team manager for a while. So just shout out to that as we can. But yeah, it's really interesting on that procurement. A couple of things that also stood out to me. One was travel, and the other one was the kit side of things. So I look at this at the grassroots level, and it's interesting looking at this as professional level, and that we could probably have a number of podcasts, probably one on each of these. But at grassroots level, there seems to be a thing where, you know, kids get a new kit probably every 2 years. When I was a kid, I remember playing at probably about under 13s, 14s. And I think 10 years later, I saw a team playing in our kit. And, you know, everybody seems to get new kits all the time. And, you know, then you look at, you know, Haaland changing kits at half time and them all having 2 or 3 kits that they can wear on the day. Where are we with that? And how can that be influenced and changed? Anyone got anything on that?
Yeah, it's a crazy one, mine. I mean, it represents our general overconsumption, I guess. You know, we're so driven by the marketing and the advertising, and this is huge revenues for professional clubs, or in fact for the kit manufacturers. The professional clubs maybe don't get as much as we would assume. So I think it's a difficult one because it reflects society more broadly, that we've now got this expectation. We're quite throwaway. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm also old enough to remember the days when, you know, you handed stuff down. I'd wear my brother's stuff, or, you know. So I don't know. I don't have a solution for it beyond saying that we ought to go back a bit to the old ways. Sounds a bit, yeah, not sure I like saying it, but you get to a certain age where it makes sense. But yeah, we don't need to be doing that. And I think, you know, there are a few clubs that have actually said we're not going to change our kit. I believe Brentford have said they're going to change every 2 years. So, you know, it's better than every year. I remember actually clubs playing in the same looking kit, maybe not the same physical shirt, but the same looking kit. That was the identity of that club. It was a huge brand. I'll be honest and say I'm not a great football fan. So sometimes when I look at football nowadays, I can't work out who's playing who, because I remember the clubs and the colours that they wore 30 years ago when I was following football much more closely. And, you know, you see somebody who used to play in blue is now playing in pink or lilac or something crazy, and you think, well, I don't get the whole brand association there. So sorry, slightly off topic and a bit of a ramble there, but no, look, it reflects society and overconsumption in general. And it's one of the things that is in the UK sport strategy. They've identified that sustainable development goal of sustainable production and consumption. And we do need to get back to that, because sport is very wasteful. And there's that whole sport as fashion, sport kit as fashion as well. So yeah, there's a whole area to explore around that as well.
I think as well, when you go to grassroots sports, obviously, like I say, I play rugby for many. Like, people look forward to stash day. They're like, they want stash. Same as the students here. They're like literally, it's a day that they mark on their calendar where they know they're going to get a bag full of kit, probably all wrapped in plastic. That they're going to be like Russell. They're going to be walking out looking smart in all their new kit. And it's really, really challenging, I think, to change that perception of that overconsumption of reuse as well. I know at my rugby club we've got a loft which has probably got kits in there from the 90s, bags and bags and bags of kit, and you just keep getting new kits. And I think some of it comes down to education as well. So going back to the strategy and how that's filtering down to the national governing bodies, and then how that's actually filtering down to clubs. How many clubs, particularly at the grassroots level, would challenge a kit manufacturer when they're going out to look at kit? How many of them would actually kind of know the things to look out for? And I think that's a really big piece of education that needs to happen. And we're about to go out to kit for my club, and actually I'm part of the kind of the little group that's looking at it. And I'm starting to go, okay, well, I know they're not very good. I know they're quite good just in general, but actually, how can we start to do that? So we're quite lucky that I can actually give that little bit of advice. But like Russ says, most clubs are volunteers. Most clubs don't have that knowledge within their group. And how can we educate them that actually, whether it's kit or whatever supplier they might be looking to work with, that they actually have the knowledge to question the norm a little bit and just really kind of challenge people and challenge the kit manufacturers to be better.
There's another one that I think the football boots is one as well, but I think we're doing a little bit better there. I've seen some good practice in some grassroots clubs of handing football boots down. The best team I play for have literally got lines and lines of boots that are just there, and it's, you know, drop a fiver if you want to, and if you don't, you can't afford it, just take whatever pair of boots you want, and there's loads there. That's why there is some good practice going on. The other one that I spoke about, I was thinking about, sorry, was around transport. And again, I think this touches on some of the stuff you said before, Russ. In that when I was a kid, we car shared, but that's because it was working class environment and we couldn't afford it. Everybody just shared, and we all jumped in a car and we squeezed in and whatever else. Now, again, I run an under-8s football team. Very rarely do people share transport. I'm not saying they won't, but, you know, at the moment, people just jump in their own car and go. How's that at Loughborough at the moment? What are we looking at doing, or what have we done already to challenge that?
I think it still happens. We certainly haven't found the answer to that fully. But there's conversations I know with some of my colleagues in Loughborough Sport that are proactively talking to books around the actual arrangements of fixtures. So how are they arranged? I know in the past, and I've experienced this myself, that 1 week I've actually ended up going to Northumbria twice within 2 weeks. One to play for our second team, and then I was actually in the third team the week after, who would then just happen to be playing to Northumbria away the week after. So you end up with a situation where you're sending half empty buses up to different sports fixtures and things like that as well. So I think the uni sport is a real big challenge about how can we better structure fixtures so that maybe teams aren't having to go, or you potentially could we host stuff regionally. So teams, 3 or 4 teams are traveling to one location to play a number of different sports rather than traveling all over the country. So we're, again, similar to how we want to facilitate conversation. We want to facilitate these conversations but we want to go, okay, how can we help you? We host the finals championships on campus where teams will travel down to Loughborough on the big books Wednesdays. But how many locations actually have the facilities to be able to host all these different multiple sports in one location? Probably not many. But we have we've done a procurement for coaches, buses, minibuses. So we've actually gone through a tender exercise where we've gone, right, what are companies? So we've now got a list of companies that we can use. We've vetted them from a sustainability perspective. So I was part of the scoring for that, so in the evaluation. So we put some really interesting questions in there and challenges that the suppliers had to answer. We then evaluated them on that. So we know that we're at a point where we are at least asking those questions. Is it perfect? No. I would love to see sustainability weighted heavier in the procurement in terms of its overall weighting, so that it starts to really make a difference in the award of the contract. It's probably still at that point where it's a bit too small. So again, I'm sure NGB is potentially struggling with the same thing, is ultimately price, getting value for money versus sustainability and things like that can quite often be a sticking point between the likes of my sales and our procurement and finance team. But at least we know now with the suppliers we've got for the coaches and the buses that most of them are actually got some pretty good, robust sustainability policies, and they're not perfect now, but they've got clear stated aims of where they want to get to as well, which means that it's a long-term partnership, and we'll work with them on that. The single-use car stuff is an interesting one, I think. Whether we'll fully ever get away from that, I'm not 100% sure. And some unis ban cars. They don't even allow cars at campuses and stuff. So it's kind of probably unique for each different one. I know something that we do at our rugby club is that we would, if we're not putting a bus on, we will usually offer to cover the fuel if you take a full carload. Now, not every club, not every grassroots club would had that small pot of spare cash to be able to do that. But that's something that we tend to do each year, is kind of go, right, if you drive and you take 5 people, we'll cover your petrol for that. So there's little things that you can do kind of at a low level that might incentivize that.
It seamlessly moved me into what we're going to talk about next to finish off. So we've spoken about the impacts that climate change is having on sport. We've started to look at the sustainability strategies and policies that people are putting in place, and kind of what's going on. I'd love to finish on kind of positive things. So you gave us an example there of your club, so the car sharing type thing. Have we got examples from grassroots or professional sport where people have started to do some real good stuff in this space? So the examples to kind of inspire others to kind of take that step.
Yeah, I think there are, and you know, some of our major venues are doing things. So probably the one that I would bring up would be Wimbledon tennis. You know, personally, look, I worked at Lords for 20 years, and it's an absolutely fabulous venue, and I love a summer test match at Lords Cricket Ground. But 2 weeks at Wimbledon, I think, to me, is sort of the ultimate sporting event, personally. But they're doing great stuff. You know, they've got a sustainability manager in place. They've looked at their carbon footprint. They know, you know, they know those numbers. They know where they need to reduce. They know what to focus on. They're looking at development across the road, so they can bring the qualifying tournament to the same venue. And they've got really good sort of biodiversity practices that are already in place. That development's not happening for a few years. So you can bring this into the way that you manage your organisation. And in fact, I think that's absolutely key. If you look at most organisation strategies, just their business strategy, but also when they're incorporating in their social impacts, EDI requirements, sustainability absolutely fits within that same positive approach and positive ethos. So it's not something that is going to jar against a typical strategy and approach. It's something that just seamlessly slips in there and really can fit. So for me, yeah, somebody like All England Lawn Tennis Club at Wimbledon exemplify a lot of the really good stuff that is happening.
Perfect. And where can people find more information about any of the good practice that is out there? Have you got things on the BASIS site?
Yeah, so the BASIS site, so basis.org.uk, there is information on there. I'll be honest and say some of it does sit behind the members area, because we're a membership organisation, so quite a lot of it does fit with that. But look, for those at Loughborough, you can get in touch with me. I'm on the London campus. I'm very happy to share my whatever knowledge I do have, knowledge and experience, but certainly happy for people to get in touch should they wish to.
I'm going to draw it to a close. I think it's been really great speaking to you both. You know, we've come up with examples of how it's impacting things, lots of ideas and lots of practice that we're doing already at Loughborough, with some practical steps that people might be able to take. I think some of the key things that has been mentioned and shines through the conversation is that we're trying to move things forward. We've got a lot of researchers doing things. We've got practitioners doing things. And Elliot, you mentioned Sport England being on campus and the conversations around different NGBs. And I think you said she was challenging you. I would say, you know, to any of those NGBs, we want to work together to kind of collaborate to make this change. And I think we're in a very strong position where we can do that. I know the university has got a host of academics that are collaborating through a new group. So the Sport for Climate Action and Nature group. There's lots of people from different schools looking at many different things. And I know we've got a number of PhD students studying in this area. Obviously, we can't talk about any of that really today. But if anybody wants to go and have a look on our website, so that's the Sport for Climate Action and Nature group at Loughborough, all the academics involved are on there, all the PhD students are on there. And moving forward in the next few months, we're going to actually dig into some of that research a bit more. We're going to put some more podcasts out there. But I want to leave it with just a final challenge, because we talked about action. And we've given some examples, and if you're involved at an NGB, obviously you're going to be looking at creating your policy right now, you know, inspired by UK sport, and that's a target for everybody to be doing. But if you're also actively involved in sport, or you're kind of part of a grassroots club or anything like that, can you start doing that in your club now? Can you be involved, or can you push somebody in the direction to go, can we have a look at this? Can we start to try and understand where we're at sustainably? Or challenging everyone now, what one thing can you do to make a change? So is it some of those things I spoke about? Can we say, do you know what? Let's keep this kit for a year longer, or let's pass it down to somebody else, or the football boots that I mentioned, or the travel. Okay, so I'll put it out there now. I'm going to speak to all the parents at my club and ask them, if we can start car sharing. There's my commitment. So if anybody else out there wants to kind of email and tell me their commitment, that would be brilliant, because it'd be amazing just to start actionable change. So I just want to leave it on that message. Really appreciate you guys speaking to me, and I'm pretty sure I'll be speaking to both of you again.
Thanks very much, Martin. Enjoyed it. Thanks, Elliot.
Yeah, pleasure. Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Russ.
Thanks for listening to the Experts in Sport podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, then please contact me, Martin Foster, at m.foster@loughborough.ac.uk. Thanks for listening. See you next time.